Hi, welcome to the Frontline Leadership podcast. And on today's show, we're talking to Rich Cardona. Let's roll the intro. Hi, Rich. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. You have a
Pleasure, man.
podcaster's voice.
It's an absolute pleasure, man. Oh, my goodness.
I'm happy to be here. It's just funny. I was listening to you and I'm like, wow, like that's a voice for podcast. This is perfect. You have found something special.
I'm not sure about the visual, but let's see how that goes. Okay, Rich. So it's great to have you on, and I want to get into. You're a fascinating character to me. You're young, but not too young. I'm looking at my reflection when I'm saying that. And you've lived a very interesting life to me. I mean, I haven't stalked you or anything like that, but
Sure.
So as I kind of we talked before we started, the idea of this podcast is to keep things as practical as possible and give people ideas and guidance on how they may go about getting where they want to go, and if they're leaders, if they're junior leaders, if they're seasoned leaders. It could be in corporate, it could be elsewhere. Just looking to really give people some practical listening and advice along the way. So for you, Rich, like you've been in the kind of military environment, and now you made the transition into civilian life. You may have answered this question before, but I'm going to ask it. Yeah. Like, how would you kind of draw on those two experiences, the differences? Like maybe you want to talk around that. That would be great.
Absolutely. So the very first thing I can tell you is, having served in the Marine Corps, and I did 17 years, I retired early, I didn't realize the level of leadership that I was around on a daily basis. I mean, I knew these people were all very special, but I didn't realize how special, the capacity, and I mean, yes, of course, I knew we were Marines, and I knew we were flying helicopters and doing all these things that a lot of people don't do or will never do. But yeah, but on the outside, and this isn't. I don't even mean this in a derogatory or negative way, but it was very different. The leadership was completely different. It was less regimented, less structured. It was very numbers driven and metrics driven and less people driven. And I think a lot of people, and I don't know if you've seen the same, but I think a lot of people get that wrong about the military. They believe we are some sort of robotic, just kind of machines, but the amount of kind of empathy, the amount of, emotional intelligence that has to go into your leadership style, regardless of what your service you're in, is critical to success, like critical to mission success. And when I didn't see that on the outside, it hurt. It was culture shock. The same culture shock I got when I went in, it was culture shock on the way out. Right. And that's what it was for me. It was an awakening. And obviously, as people like us do, we have to adjust.
Yeah, that's very interesting you say that. And I can't relate to serving, but I can certainly relate to, like, when I first started out on the leadership path as a junior, like back in that day, and it's going back a few years, managing and leading people was, particularly in where I was in manufacturing and in the private sector, was maybe this wasn't globally, but certainly for me, the environment that I was brought up in as a new leader was one of occasionally, at times, blood and thunder. There was not a lot of there was no blood, but but there was not a lot of I can't remember my first manager empathizing a great deal with me. I can't remember him being very tolerant of of people's mistakes and of asking questions. And for me, my eyes opened, as you said yourself, to when I experienced a person like that. I thought, goodness me, like I want to be that guy, because he was completely different.
Yes.
And on the outside, he was a new guy. He came into the company, and like there's always a little bit of people were nervous. What's going to happen.
Sure.
But this guy was super cool. Listen
Yeah.
to you, spend most of his time listening,
Yep.
and asking how he could help you. And back at that time, I don't believe certainly it was that widespread. I mean, now we've kind of learned more, I feel,
Mhm.
in the leadership world. And like you say, without that, you're on very shaky ground.
Can I hit on something you said? Just
Yeah.
you mentioned the very first thing you mentioned after you mentioned that person who had an impact was, he listened a lot, and then you said it
Yep.
again. We always remember the people who listen. Like we always remember those people, right? For
Yeah.
the right reasons, okay? And because at least there's an intent there
Yeah.
to do right. I think anyone who's been ahead, the failures that I've seen in superiors that I've been around is they are not able to they are so far removed from that junior of a position. Like, let's just say I'm brand new, they're so far removed from it, they almost project, how much they disliked being so naive or green that they
Right.
have no tolerance for it. And that is counterproductive to the max extent.
Yeah. Yeah. I've
Um,
seen that
you
for
know what I'm
sure.
saying?
Yeah.
So the good, and I'll give you an example of one of my favorite senior instructors when I was a junior pilot. And when I was a junior pilot, I mean, it was tough. And we get debriefed. Like as soon as the flight's over, I mean, it is just pages and pages of what you did not do right. It was
Really.
awful, but essential. However, in the
Right.
aircraft, as it's happening, when you were maybe, making small mistakes, which happen all the time. I mean, you're doing so many different things. Some instructors I had would just say like, "What are you doing?" Or like, "Get it together." Just they would say words.
Right.
One person I'll never forget who had the biggest impact on me. I remember we were flying. I made a navigation mistake, and he goes, "Oh man," he goes, "See what you just did there?" I was like, "Yep." He goes, "I used to do that all the time."
Right.
He goes, "Here's how I fixed it." And I was just like, "Oh, you were like me once."
Right.
Like all of a sudden, he took it from here to here, and I was, instead of bracing myself for what he was going to say, I was wide open. And I can almost guarantee you, I can't remember specifically, of course, that I absorbed it exactly to the way that would not only benefit me, but benefit the squadron, because now
Right.
I have absolved myself of that mistake. But it's critical. I mean, you said listening twice. I mean, I had to comment that's a huge thing. I think it's important for senior leaders just to remember is talk less, listen more. And look, people like you and I like to talk. But
Yeah. Sure.
sometimes you just have to listen. And sometimes the less you say and the more you can empathize and remind them that you know what it's like to be in their shoes, I think real growth occurs there.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem for. I mean, this is like I've got. It's not about me, Rich, but
Mhm.
I think leadership. I want to ask you a question about leadership because, like leadership. I mean, we've talked about your background in the military. You've touched on that and explained the differences and some of the parallels too. But I mean, this is for me. For me, leadership is not about. And this is real, Rich. I mean, anybody that knows me knows that this is the kind of stuff that I'm gonna talk about, and I intend to talk about that on the podcast. For me, and you may agree, you may not, is more of for me, it's like a life thing. It's not like I lead. I try and lead at home. I try and lead it
Yes.
in the workplace. I try and lead
Yes.
in the grocery store. If somebody's being rude or if they're being, you understand what I mean? It's just, I think I just can't. I can switch it off, but I feel that it's important that we don't switch it off. I said because I think in the past, where I fell down, where I made bigger mistakes, was actually not, to your point, making people aware that that I've been there, I've made all those mistakes and more, and they need to hear that. It's I think it's critical.
I think that what you're talking about, it's right before you said grocery store. I promise you, I'm not exaggerating for the sake of a podcast. I imagined putting shopping carts away, and then you said at the grocery store. I'm like, the little things like that, and it's funny because there's a time where I wasn't like that, and my wife would insist on it. But anyway, what I was gonna say was, I think the leadership that you're describing is birthed out of core values and just standards that you decide to have. And
now, how much of that do you think, Rich? I'm sorry to interrupt you. How much do you think you use the phrase "birthed out of you," and you use the word values? And I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from, Rich? Do you think that I've written down on a piece of paper here, born or built, when we're talking about leaders? Now, but more than that, your point about values, where do you think that comes from, Rich? Like at the core of it?
The best people I know have the best values.
Right.
And
but as a kid, you don't just, as a 5-year-old, you don't kind of say, I believe in truth and honesty and integrity and right. But there are kids out there. I can remember being a 7-year-old, 8-year-old. I had to be the captain of the soccer team. I had to be. I looked around the field and I could see things.
So funny.
Right. And it's just like, dude, like we're going to, and it's funny because like, what do I know? Right. And so I'm just wondering, I just wanted to push on that point a little bit.
It's interesting because I was not that guy. I was the complete opposite. I actually made a YouTube video about this in boot camp, how I wanted to blend in. I think what you're describing and people who have had it, kind of that instinctual, lifelong desire to lead. It's not necessarily just about values as well, but it's more of it's progress. It's like how I saw a video yesterday, that life is not about perfection, it's about progression. And a lot of us meander, and some of my content, a lot of us meander through life, and then all of a sudden we're like, what the heck just happened? I think some people are just blessed with a mindset at a younger age where they are just, they know there's more. They always know there's more. Where for me, I looked at more as more work, as more of a challenge, and I didn't want any part of it. I wanted to be comfortable, and obviously that changed. But it's very different, for people like you. And there's plenty of kids like that now, obviously, and adults. But when it's instilled in you at such a young age, or whether you instilled it in yourself, I mean, that's something you got to be grateful for.
I mean, for me, I think my grandfather was very influential in that respect. I mean, we're not going to get talking about giving my life story on a podcast.
No problem.
But yeah, I found, and it was kind of odd because it wasn't really that it wasn't like I want to be the boss of everybody. That I don't remember it even being like that. And I fell into a big trap when I'd gone into leadership in like the manufacturing industry, where I actually took on that exact thing that I shouldn't have taken on.
Oh wow!
I was young and I was trying to make an impact, and most people that I was leading were much older than me. They'd been in the industry for much longer than me, and I wasn't going to stand. And I just made that mistake. And it was,
ambition. It's okay to be ambitious.
But you know what? They took me back. I got slapped down metaphorically.
Yes.
And I just went back and said, "Look, guys, I'm so sorry. Can we start again? I need your help. We've got stuff to do. From that moment on, I just try to stick to that path.
Yep.
So it's very interesting. So what do you think the main? Can I just poke on something that's just out there a little bit
Go ahead.
about you?
Oh, go ahead.
So I've seen. I'm just trying to make it interesting further because you've come from like that background, and then you made a transition, as we've spoken about, into civilian life and what you've been doing. But I've noticed on some of your content, you started talking about, and I don't even know what this is. This is why I'm asking.
Sure.
NFTs, like how do you go from flying an attack helicopter to NFTs? Like in terms of, you're clearly a leader, Rich. Like it's like you may not have been born that way, you think,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of avoided those situations, if I heard you correctly.
Right.
But what that's kind of. I mean, it's on. I guess it's. I'll let you talk. Like, how did
Yeah.
you get from? How did
I'm
you get
so
from
glad.
there to there?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. So, I mean, for the last 3 years, I've been podcasting, or almost 3 years, and I have a podcast that's actually coming to an end called The Leadership Locker, and
The
I love
leadership
it.
locker. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the best. I mean, like I have such a great time doing it.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone listening, I find it would be hard for you to deny that having a podcast and having a podcast in which you interview guests, it'd be hard to deny that you don't learn something. And I don't mean like learn a new skill per se, but you do learn a new perspective. You learn about other people. And that's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Well, NFTs are this just absolute vague, clumsy, massively profitable digital art thing that's going on. And a friend of mine and I, Heather, we met in person for the first time. We've known each other for 3 years. We met each other for the first time in person not long ago at a conference, and we were talking about them and the amount of money people were investing in and just this potential fad. I mean, who knows? So we just decided, she's a podcaster as well, that we're so new at this. Why don't we just, document the journey essentially? Okay.
Right.
And we are newbies and we want other newbies to join us as we learn. Well, it just took a turn like a rocket ship. I think at the time of this recording, we're at 47,000 downloads. We'll be at 50,000, 100 for sure by the end of the week in just about 90 days. That's crazy for her and for I. And the point here is, and she and I have been talking about this a lot, we're going all in, making a YouTube channel. We're already sponsored. And all these things are scary because we're not experts in the space, David. Like, not at all. We're the complete opposite. Right. And you know what the lesson there is that, yes, there is leadership in the sense that we are doing things that a lot of people don't want to do. And we are going into the fire to try and find out the information, get the guests, learn, put out content about it, risking our reputations, so to speak, by being non-experts in something. And it's doing better than anything we've ever done combined. And the lesson there is just, being comfortable with what you don't know. And you mentioned it earlier. You said when you went back, how you said, I need your help. Yeah. Like, that's literally what we were doing, saying we need your help, but we'll just help each other in the meantime. And all of a sudden, all these NFT experts and people are just dying to get on the show. Yeah. So I think that is a huge, huge lesson that we've learned. And as she and I talked about it, and we both have our respective businesses, our own businesses. I mean, it is now a business, but we are not going to shy away from this opportunity, no matter how big and intimidating and and how much it changes every single day, and the crypto involved and the art involved and the terms and the discords and the new apps and everything. No matter how overwhelming, we know there's a massive amount of the population that has no idea what these things are.
Yeah, seriously.
And that's
people
what makes
run from it.
Yeah, and that's what makes the content already kind of evergreen. So yeah, it's very interesting. She's called me a leader before, and I've called her a leader before, and I feel like she and I are trying our best to lead in a space. And there's nothing to be afraid of, but there is an element of vulnerability there.
Right.
I mean, it's really hard to talk about things you don't know. So yeah, that's the story, and we love it. We love it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I know absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to profess to know a single dram of information about NFTs,
Yeah.
but I'm going to go look at it, because if you're looking at it, then I
Yeah,
think
please
I need to go
check it
look
out.
at it.
We could talk after. I'll make sure you have the right link, but check it out. I think you'll enjoy it.
Okay, so you touched on this earlier on. You back to the leadership thing. You saw some. If you had to kind of, what was your biggest struggle? Do you think in terms of coming to terms with leading? I mean, you're very kind of modest about your. You're very modest, but you are. That's what you're doing. What was your biggest hurdle? Was it? You tell me. What was your biggest hurdle?
You know, I know I mentioned the podcast before, the Leadership Locker, and I've interviewed a lot of
Hmm.
very, very successful entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
And
I
I
want to
could
talk
tell
about that, man.
you, yeah, and I could tell you that all of them, with maybe the exception of two, are self-conscious. Just
Really?
like you, just like me. No matter how successful, no matter what their bank account says, no matter how much of an influencer they are, no matter how much of an impact they've had, I mean, they're they're all self-conscious. My fear in leadership and the biggest challenge is this sort of it's an irrational fear that I'm going to get exposed, that somehow I'm going to be made out to be less of a business person than I think I am, that
Right.
I'm going to come across unintelligent because I choose not to speak a certain way for a podcast. I just say
Right.
whatever the hell I want.
Yeah.
That I'm somehow going to be exposed as a podcaster who doesn't do things the way traditional podcasters does, and that way I can't be taken seriously.
Right.
Just that fear of being exposed is the biggest challenge, and with that, I have just learned, in order to combat that, you just have to put an extensive amount of effort into things that you want to actually become masterful at. We're all good at a lot of things, okay? But to be truly masterful at something is a very different story. So, that's why I'm really big on routines, and I have very good allocated amounts of time to, fitness and reading and studying my industry and trying to differentiate myself. But the biggest challenge and the thing that helps me combat that is the routine. But the biggest challenge is just this irrational fear of getting exposed. And I don't think that's uncommon, to be completely honest, especially like after what I told you about, that first season
Yeah.
of all those interviews.
It's interesting. I'm not going to name the guy, but there's an ex Navy SEAL, just kind of linking it in, who
Sure.
you'll know. You'll probably know who I'm talking about. He does some fairly what's the word I'm looking for? Some fairly straightforward videos on social media, and he was talking about in his unique way that he does things, normally with his shirt off.
Yes.
Where he makes the exact same point about, you see people on social media and you see all these successful people and so on and so forth. He says, but they're just like you and me, brother. They've got two voices in their head and so on and so forth. So it's very
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
true
true.
enough. The leadership locker, Rich, I've got to ask, where did you
Mm.
come up with? What was the intent behind that? Like the name, like that's interesting.
Yeah. This is really interesting. I have never been asked that. That's a great question. I made that podcast. It was my third podcast. My first two were jokes, and failed miserably. I didn't know what I was doing, and what I wanted to talk about. But once I knew what I wanted to talk about and the type of people I wanted to interview,
Hmm.
I just decided the Leadership Locker. And what I was trying to do was to help people in Act Two of their lives, specifically military veterans. I
Okay.
wanted them to get knowledge and experience, and just get practical education, just like exactly what you're doing, so that way they could start their own businesses. And the reason is 25% of United States veterans want to start their own business, but only 2%, maybe less, do. And I always wondered
Really?
why.
Right.
And here I was, and by no means, this is 2 years ago, by no means successful. I mean, I think I had 1.5 clients or something ridiculous. But I had seen enough,
Half a
and I'm like,
client.
yeah, yeah. And I just said, let me, this is a win for me. This is a win for them. Like,
Mhm.
if I want to know how to negotiate, I'm going to interview a negotiator. If I want to
Right.
learn more about sales, if I want to learn about SEO, if I want to learn about mental health, if I want to learn about, imposter syndrome, then I'm just going to interview the people. I could talk about my things and, my journey, of course, but that's kind of uninteresting. So if I could get experts on,
Yeah.
credible people, that
Yeah.
lends credibility to me, and then hopefully my impact my desired impact actually has a chance.
Right.
So I just don't want people to be afraid. And we talked in the warm up about this, but I'm really going a different direction with things, and I just want people to realize that. And I think I said it earlier. There's just more. There's more, and we talk ourselves out of it, very, very well. And I'd like to be a conduit to people talking themselves into it, and that's what I want.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Okay, Rich. I'm not going to keep you all night. So tell me, tell these people where they can find you.
Thank you, David. Look, LinkedIn, I'm there. That's where we met. So LinkedIn, Rich Cardona. You can find me, my YouTube channel, Rich Cardona, as well. Actually, I'm just Rich Cardona everywhere. And then the podcast. And here you go. This is getting released soon, huh? Let's see. Well, be on the lookout. I'll just say. I don't want to say it just yet. Be on the lookout. The Leadership Locker is wrapping up at episode 200. It has been unbelievable,
Yeah.
just game changing. But I'm ready for another chapter. So
Good for you, man.
just right before Thanksgiving, you will see, if you type in Rich Cardona into any podcast app, you will see the new podcast, and something very consistent with what I was just describing. I'm trying to encourage people to go for it instead of run away from it.
That's beautiful, man. Good for you. Good for you.
Thank
You'll
you.
be a great success.
Thank you.
Okay, so you can pick 2 words or 3 words, and this is the final. These are the final words of this broadcast.
Yes.
Broadcast. Listen to me. I'm showing my age now. Around leadership. If you could think back to when in your life, could be a parent, it could be a neighbor, it could be in the military, it could be in civilian life. You don't have to name them, but describe you talked about values earlier on. If you could keep that person anonymous and just describe them in 2 words or 3 words, and then we're out.
Yes. Fair, methodical, and engaging, I think, is how I would describe that leader. In every facet, they were those 3 things, and I will never, ever forget it.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.